Have you ever noticed how silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could? When you finally stop chasing, explaining, or proving your worth, something strange happens. The person who once ran from closeness suddenly starts searching for you in every quiet space you've left behind. We're taught that closure comes from a final talk, that long, emotional conversation where we pour everything out hoping they'll finally understand. But the truth, closure doesn't come from their understanding. It comes from your decision. The moment you stop trying to be heard and start choosing peace over performance, you create a kind of silence that's impossible to ignore. Avoidant people, the ones who retreat when things get real, are not moved by pressure, they're moved by absence. When you stop filling the air with pursuit, they suddenly have to sit with the echo of what they've lost. Your silence becomes the mirror they've been avoiding. And that's the moment everything shifts. Because this isn't the silence of punishment, it's the silence of self-respect. It's you saying, I don't need to convince you of my value anymore. If you can't meet me there, I'll meet myself. And ironically, that's the silence that pulls them back, not because you've manipulated them, but because you've broken the pattern that made them comfortable. You're no longer chasing, you're no longer trying to make it work. You've made peace with the possibility of walking away. And that's what makes them realize what they're about to lose. So don't underestimate the power of quiet closure. It's not the sound of giving up, it's the sound of reclaiming your power. Because when you move on without noise, you don't just leave the relationship, you leave an impression. Silence isn't absence, it's energy withdrawal. Most people think that when they stop texting, calling, or explaining, they're just creating space. But what really happens is far deeper than that. You're not just stepping back physically, you're removing the emotional energy that once held the connection together. Every time you reached out, every reassuring message, every attempt to make things feel safe, that was emotional labor. You were the one keeping the emotional thread alive, and when you withdraw that energy, the dynamic changes completely. Avoidant individuals thrive in a relationship where they feel in control of distance. They're most comfortable when someone else is maintaining the closeness for them. As long as you keep initiating, they can relax into their pattern of pulling away, knowing you'll bridge the gap. Your effort becomes the cushion for their avoidance. But the moment you stop filling that space, they're left alone with the silence they once claimed to need. And that silence, ironically, becomes deafening. It's easy to confuse this silence with passive aggression or manipulation. But this kind of silence is not about punishment. It's about self-preservation. You're not withholding love. You're simply no longer offering it where it's not reciprocated. You're saying, without words, I'm not going to chase connection with someone who runs from it. And that message, even when unspoken, carries a power that no argument ever could. When you stop giving your energy, it doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you're no longer trying to force what's not flowing naturally. You start to notice how much of yourself you gave away just to maintain a sense of closeness. You realize that you were the emotional anchor all along, and without you, the dynamic doesn't hold. For the avoidant who's used to emotional reassurance without accountability, this is a shock. They suddenly have to feel the discomfort that they've always outsourced to you. Silence also strips away the noise. It exposes truth. When you're constantly explaining yourself, justifying your feelings, or trying to make peace, the avoidant can stay detached behind a wall of excuses. I just need space. I'm not ready. I'm too busy. But when you withdraw your energy, there's nothing left for them to hide behind. They can't blame pressure because there isn't any. They can't point to conflict because you're not arguing. All that's left is the reality of their own distance reflected back at them through your calm. In this space, something interesting happens. The avoidant starts to feel the emotional contrast. They go from feeling suffocated by your presence to feeling the coldness of your absence. Not because you've disappeared, but because your warmth is no longer available to them. What they once took for granted now feels uncertain. That emotional availability they assumed would always be there suddenly isn't, and the stability they thought they didn't need becomes the thing they crave. When you withdraw your energy, you're also reclaiming your emotional boundaries. You're showing that your attention is valuable, that it's not something anyone can take for granted. You're reminding both yourself and them that your love is not endless currency. It's a privilege that must be earned and maintained. This realization doesn't just change how they see you, it changes how you see yourself. You begin to recognize that real connection doesn't require constant effort from one person, it requires balance. And this is where the quiet shift occurs. The avoidant, who once saw your efforts as pressure, begins to associate your silence with loss. They start replaying conversations in their mind, wondering if you've stopped caring, if someone else has your attention, or if they misjudged your commitment. They may not say it out loud, but they feel it, the subtle ache of missing the energy that once surrounded them. The beauty of this silence is that it teaches through experience. The avoidant has to confront the emotional reality they've been avoiding. You don't have to lecture, plead, or prove your worth. Your absence delivers the message more powerfully than words ever could. Because silence, when it comes from self-respect, doesn't create distance. It creates clarity. It reveals who values your presence and who only notices it once it's gone. Closure is a decision, not a dialogue. So many people chase closure like it's something they can extract from another person. A final conversation, an apology, an explanation that will finally make the pain make sense. But waiting for someone else to give you peace is like standing outside in the rain, hoping the storm will stop because you've asked nicely. Closure isn't granted, it's chosen. It begins the moment you stop looking for answers in the same place that hurt you. When you base your healing on what someone else says or does, you hand them the keys to your peace. You make your emotional stability dependent on whether they're willing to show up, admit fault, or validate your experience. The problem is that many people, especially avoidants, are not capable of giving you the kind of clarity you want. They avoid emotional accountability, not because they want to hurt you, but because facing the truth makes them deeply uncomfortable. They'd rather disappear, minimize, or rationalize than confront the emotional impact of their behavior. So when you go looking for closure from them, you're essentially asking for something they don't have the capacity to give. True closure comes from acceptance, not explanation. It's the quiet understanding that you may never know why things happened the way they did, and choosing to move forward anyway. You don't need to understand every detail of their behavior to find peace. You only need to understand what it revealed about your needs, your boundaries, and your worth. Sometimes the real closure is realizing that someone's silence or distance is the answer. You don't need a final talk when their actions already spoke volumes. There's a moment in every heartbreak when you stop trying to fix it and start trying to free yourself. That moment doesn't come with fanfare, it's often silent, even private. It's the day you wake up and decide that you're done rehearsing conversations in your head. You're done trying to find the perfect words that would have made them stay. You're done searching for reasons that justify their choices. That's the real closure, when you no longer need to rewrite the past to make it feel fair. When you make closure your own decision, you shift from being the one waiting to being the one choosing. You take your power back, you stop standing at the emotional door of someone who walked away and start walking yourself through a new one. You realize that peace doesn't require permission. You can let go without their apology, without their understanding, without their final words. You can choose to release the story, even if it never got the ending you wanted. This kind of closure is not an act of coldness, it's an act of self-love. It says, I don't need you to fix the way I feel. I can heal myself. It's maturity in motion, the ability to move forward even when things remain unfinished. It's accepting that not every connection is meant to be resolved through conversation. Some are meant to be resolved through reflection. When you realize that, you start to detach from the need to win or to be understood. You begin to value your inner calm more than external validation. And something powerful happens when you choose closure for yourself. The emotional hold that person had over you begins to fade. You stop replaying old memories trying to find the turning point. You stop fantasizing about a moment of clarity that will suddenly make everything okay. You start to feel your own energy coming back to you, piece by piece, as you redirect your focus from them to yourself. You begin to rebuild, not from the story of what they did, but from the story of what you learned. Closure as a decision is the moment you stop asking why and start asking what now. It's shifting from seeking reasons to seeking direction. You may still care, still remember, still feel the sting, but you're no longer ruled by it. You've stopped waiting for them to give you peace. because you've realized you already have everything you need to create it yourself. That's when the past loses its grip, not because it suddenly makes sense, but because you've decided it doesn't need to anymore. Self-respect is more magnetic than persuasion. There's a quiet strength that radiates from someone who knows their worth, not the kind of worth that demands recognition, but the kind that exists independent of anyone's approval. When you stop trying to convince someone to value you, you shift the energy in the connection completely. Persuasion chases, self-respect attracts. One tries to prove something, the other simply is. And people feel that difference immediately, even if they can't explain it. When you try to persuade someone to see your value, you're operating from a place of fear. The fear that if you don't explain yourself well enough, show enough effort, or prove your loyalty, you'll be overlooked or abandoned. But that fear-based energy is exhausting. It communicates on a subconscious level that you don't fully believe in your own worth. It says, I'll keep earning my place here until you decide I'm enough. And the more you chase validation, the more it slips away. The person on the other side feels that imbalance. They feel that you're seeking their approval, and that makes them step back because validation begged for never feels inspiring. It feels heavy. Self-respect flips that dynamic. It says, I know what I bring, and I won't beg for you to see it. It's calm. It doesn't chase or demand. It creates a boundary without hostility, and in that calmness lies power. When someone senses that you're not willing to shrink to fit their comfort, you become infinitely more intriguing. Your energy says, I'm here by choice, not necessity. You no longer seek connection as a form of validation, you seek it as a reflection of mutual value. That shift changes everything. In relationships, especially with avoidant types, persuasion often becomes a habit. You find yourself explaining your feelings, your intentions, your pain, trying to be understood so that closeness can return. But persuasion doesn't build attraction, it builds dependence. The more you try to convince them to care, the more they associate you with pressure rather than peace. Self-respect, on the other hand, removes that pressure completely. It doesn't say, look at what you're losing. It says, I trust you to see my worth, and if you don't, I trust myself enough to walk away. That confidence disarms people. It doesn't push, it invites reflection. When you stand in self-respect, you no longer over-explain. You don't chase clarity through someone else's lens. You define it through your own. You start making choices that align with your standards instead of your fears. You stop accepting crumbs because you realize you deserve consistency. You no longer tolerate confusion disguised as emotional complexity. You know that if someone truly values you, their effort will show it. If not, you won't try to earn what should flow naturally. That mindset, though subtle, creates an undeniable shift in how others perceive you. People are drawn to those who seem grounded in their own worth. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. You're not trying to prove you're enough, you're simply living as though you already are. That creates a sense of safety, admiration, and even curiosity in others. They begin to wonder what makes you so centered, why you're not seeking validation like most people do. It makes them respect you, even if they don't fully understand it. And for avoidant personalities, who are often drawn to emotional independence, this energy is particularly magnetic. Your calm detachment awakens something in them. A recognition that they can't control your emotions anymore. You've stopped playing the game of pursuit and retreat. You've reclaimed your balance. Persuasion tries to win attention, self-respect holds attention effortlessly. The person who once took you for granted now feels the shift. They sense that your energy no longer revolves around their approval, and that unfamiliarity creates tension. The good kind, the kind that makes them take notice. They may start showing up differently, not because you've demanded it, but because they feel the absence of your old, persuasive energy. Self-respect has a quiet magnetism that no words can replicate. It's in your tone, your posture, your choices. It's in how you don't chase after mixed signals, how you no longer accept half-hearted effort. It's not about trying to make someone regret losing you. It's about embodying the version of yourself that would never have to beg to be seen in the first place. And once you operate from that space, everything about the dynamic changes. You stop being someone who needs to be chosen and become someone who gets to choose. Breaking the chase pattern restores balance. Every relationship has an unspoken rhythm. One person reaches out, the other pulls away, and the cycle repeats until it becomes familiar. almost addictive. This chase dynamic is particularly common when dealing with avoidant partners. One person, usually the more emotionally available one, becomes the pursuer, trying to fix, understand, and hold things together. The avoidant, on the other hand, becomes the distancer, retreating whenever intimacy feels too close or too uncertain. Over time, both people get trapped in roles that drain them. The pursuer feels rejected and anxious, while the avoidant feels pressured and misunderstood. But when the chase finally stops, everything in the relationship shifts, not because the avoidant suddenly changes, but because the energy dynamic that sustained the imbalance no longer exists. When you are the one doing the chasing, even with good intentions, you end up taking emotional responsibility for both people. You regulate their moods, reassure their fears, and bridge every emotional gap. You start believing that if you can just love them right, say the perfect words, give enough patience, or show enough loyalty, they'll stop pulling away. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more you chase, the less they feel the need to come forward. They don't have to take emotional initiative because you've already taken all of it. In trying to hold the connection together, you unintentionally make it one-sided. Breaking this pattern doesn't mean you suddenly stop caring. It means you stop over-functioning. You stop taking ownership of the emotional work that isn't yours. You stop trying to close the gap that someone else keeps creating. It's a subtle but powerful decision to allow the space to exist without rushing to fill it. It's uncomfortable at first because you're used to motion, to fixing, to doing something. The silence feels unnatural, but it's in that discomfort that the balance begins to return. When you step back, the avoidant is forced to experience the emotional weight of their own distance. Before, they could withdraw without consequence because you were always there, ready to reach across the space they left. But once you stop chasing, they can no longer hide behind your effort. They're left alone with the emptiness they created, and that's when the dynamic begins to reverse. Suddenly, they're the ones wondering where your energy went. They start to feel the absence that your pursuit once covered up. What they once saw as pressure now feels like comfort they've lost. This shift isn't about manipulation, it's about alignment. You're no longer trying to control how the other person behaves. You're simply refusing to participate in an unhealthy rhythm. You're giving both people the chance to take responsibility for their own role, and in doing so, you restore equilibrium. The avoidant now has to make a choice: step up and meet you halfway, or let the connection fade. Either way, you're free from the emotional tug of war. Breaking the chase pattern also helps you reconnect with your own sense of self. When you're always chasing, your identity becomes wrapped around the relationship, around fixing, proving, and earning closeness. Once you stop, you start remembering who you were before all the effort. You have time to reflect, to breathe, to notice how much energy you've been pouring into someone else. You begin to see how the chase distracted you from your own needs. And that realization, while painful, is also liberating. Something else happens when the chase stops. The emotional polarity resets. In the beginning, you may have been drawn to the avoidant because of their calm or independence, qualities you admired. But as you chased, that calm turned into coldness and your warmth turned into anxiety. When you stop running after them, you reclaim your own calm. You stop reacting and start observing. You stop over-investing and start receiving. And that steadiness, that groundedness, is deeply attractive. The avoidant, who once felt overwhelmed by your pursuit, now senses your emotional independence. And that's when they start moving closer, not because you asked them to, but because they feel drawn to your balance. Breaking the chase pattern isn't easy because it means surrendering control. You have to let the relationship breathe without knowing whether it will survive the silence. But in doing so, you create the only conditions under which a real connection can grow. You give both people space to show up authentically without force or fear. And no matter what happens next, you win. Because you've stepped out of the exhausting dance of pursuit and avoidance and returned to a place of emotional equilibrium where peace isn't something you chase, it's something you choose. Your silence leaves an echo, not an empty space. When you finally stop reaching out, explaining, and holding the emotional weight of the connection, the absence you leave behind isn't quiet at all. It reverberates. The avoidant, who once sought distance as a form of safety, begins to feel the weight of that silence in a way they never anticipated. It's not the silence of indifference, it's the silence of finality, of energy withdrawn with intention. There's something haunting about the calm of someone who has stopped fighting for clarity. It lingers. It makes them wonder if your stillness means peace or if it means goodbye. People often assume silence is passive, but it's one of the most powerful forms of communication. Words can be debated, dismissed, or ignored, but silence leaves room for reflection. It forces the other person to fill the space with their own thoughts, their own guilt, their own realizations. When you go quiet, truly quiet, not as a strategy, but as an act of acceptance, it unsettles the avoidant because it breaks the rhythm they relied on. They were used to you trying, reaching out, and carrying the emotional connection. Your silence removes their safety net, and for the first time, they're left to face the emptiness they created. What makes this silence different is the energy behind it. It's not a wall, it's a mirror. It doesn't punish, it reflects. It shows the other person what the relationship looks like without your effort holding it together. They feel the shift energetically, even if no words are exchanged. The avoidant, who once equated closeness with pressure, begins to miss the very presence they pushed away. They don't realize how much of the emotional warmth came from you until it's gone. The texts that used to annoy them are now missed. The reassurance that once felt overwhelming now feels comforting in hindsight. That's the echo, the lingering imprint of your energy, your care, your consistency. Silence also reintroduces mystery. When you stop broadcasting your emotions, the avoidant loses access to your inner world. They can't predict how you feel anymore, and that unpredictability captures their attention. Humans, by nature, are drawn to what they can't fully understand. When you were explaining yourself, they could stay detached because they knew exactly where you stood. But silence leaves them guessing. It invites curiosity and sometimes regret. They begin to wonder if you've moved on, if you've stopped caring, or if someone else now occupies the space they once took for granted. That uncertainty becomes the echo they can't quiet. This quiet distance also allows you to reclaim your emotional energy. Instead of pouring it into a one-sided effort, you start to redirect it inward. You begin to rebuild your sense of peace, to reconnect with yourself outside the story of what went wrong. Your silence gives you space to heal, but it also gives them space to see. It exposes the imbalance that words could never explain. In the noise of emotional pursuit, it was easy for the avoidant to overlook your presence. In silence, it becomes impossible to ignore. There's a psychological truth behind this. People don't miss what they have, they miss what they can no longer access. Your silence creates that boundary. It marks the shift from availability to autonomy. The avoidant feels that difference deeply because they've lost the one thing they could always count on: your effort. And the irony is, it's only when you stop offering your energy that they start to feel the full impact of its loss. Silence, when it comes from strength, turns absence into awareness. That awareness is powerful. It doesn't guarantee they'll return or change, but it ensures that your presence will be remembered. Not because you begged or pleaded, but because your absence spoke in a language they could finally hear. Silence highlights everything words failed to convey: your value, your boundaries, your peace. It says, I don't need to explain myself anymore. And that quiet confidence echoes louder than any confrontation ever could. The echo of your silence doesn't fade quickly. It lingers in the spaces where your energy used to live, in their thoughts, in their routines, in the small moments when they realize something feels missing. It's the sound of them replaying what happened, wondering if they pushed too far, if they mistook your love for dependency. It's the realization that your silence isn't the absence of care, but the presence of self-respect. And that echo stays long after the words have stopped, reminding them, and you, that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is saying nothing at all. When you finally understand the power of silence, something remarkable happens. You stop seeking closure in noise and start finding it in peace. You realize that every unanswered message, every withdrawn effort, every moment of stillness was never a sign of weakness. It was strength taking shape. Silence becomes your boundary, your teacher, and your message all at once. It teaches you that real power doesn't come from convincing someone to stay, it comes from knowing when to stop trying. The avoidant may return, they may not. But that's no longer the point. What matters is that you've reclaimed your voice by no longer needing to use it for validation. You've turned what once felt like rejection into redirection. You've remembered that your energy is precious and that whoever gets to experience it should earn it with effort, consistency, and respect. The silence you once feared has now become your sanctuary, a place where peace replaces pain and self-worth replaces anxiety. And as you walk away from what no longer grows you, you carry something even more valuable than closure, clarity, the clarity that you don't need to chase to be chosen, that love doesn't require losing yourself to keep someone else comfortable, that sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones written in quiet strength rather than dramatic goodbyes. So if you're standing in that silence right now, unsure of what it means, let it speak. Let it show you what was real, what was worth it, and what it's time to release. Because in that stillness, you'll hear something you might have forgotten, your own power. Thank you for listening, for showing up for your healing, and for choosing to rise above what tried to make you question your worth. If this message finds you in your quiet season, know that your silence isn't the end, it's the beginning of your peace. Take your lessons, hold your head high, and move forward with grace. You've said enough. Now, let your silence say the rest. Thank you, truly, for your time, your heart, and your courage.